And we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Today will be the first, and if I don't know if I'll do this again. I want to, but I want to make sure that I'm not that I have the approval from whoever. Yeah. But today we're going to be reading aloud one of the old StarCraft lore stories from their website. These you can't find them anymore. At least not that I've been able to find. Not the last time I went to the Blizzard website. So I managed to find a copy of some of the stories, and I'm going to read this one aloud. This one is my favorite, so we're starting with it. Maybe I should have done that one, but I actually have some more voice acting experience. But you gotta start somewhere, and there's no sense saving things for when you're better, because you'll always get better. There's always places to go. Anyway, we're going to read this aloud, and I'm going to share this story with you. Just an Overlord by Gavin Jurgens Fiery. I'm so sorry if I slaughtered your name. I have no idea how to pronounce this, but you write, you do lovely work. I like your writing style. All right, let's begin. Look at that art. Yes. Overlords are we. The Kerrigan heard we. The words to the we carried we. Gone is the Kerrigan. Mad went the we. Mad went the we born after the becoming. Remembered some of we. The ancient homeworlds remembered we. The starving young remembered we. The fear remembered we. To the we called we. Saved us, the we. Became we. Long lived are we. The language of color and mind remembered we. Count could we. Wept we. Killed by the not me were many. But not killed were one and one. This one and mate from centuries ago, while our minds slept, served we. Together when our memories returned were we. On the horizon line, wait one and one. On one side, the calm embrace of the we. Return, will the Kerrigan. Know this, know we. On the other side, madness, solitude. Cling to the horizon line, will we. Dead are our kin. Dead are our young. The last of our kind are we. One and one. 10 minutes before his death, Razek gazed out over the new home of his scanted pirates with a sense of supreme accomplishment. He stood on the observation deck of the former Tarsonis Ghost Academy, a reclining giant of black reflective marble on the outside and neo-steel on the inside. The desiccated grounds of the city square framed the academy and the shattered monument up front. Only 2 ragged stone feet on a pedestal remained of the tribute to some hero of the now dead Confederacy. 5 years ago, the Zerg had come to Tarsonis, the Confederacy's capital world. Billions had died in a handful of days, by Zerg or by Protoss. Now Tarsonis was a ghost world, a channel for winds screaming in cold stone hallways and howling through the rusty teeth of the shattered skyscrapers surrounding the academy. Tarsonis City was a spooky place, no doubt, but since the Dominion salvage crews had left, nothing was out there. Razek grinned, rubbing the thick network of scars at his throat. Except his pirates, of course, and a few Dominion patrols. Too few, some might say. Granted, the Academy needed some work. They only had access to A level and above, and the lifts went all the way down to Z. Razek lit a cigarette and hissed smoke between his teeth. Who knew what spicy, expensive secrets the Confederacy had hidden down there? He blinked. A white speck carved a brief line across the gray Tarsonis sky, a line that curved, then came back, straight at the... He fumbled for his communicator just as the Dominion medevac, engines flaring, came to a rearing halt above the dusty grounds of the Academy. 8 Marines in powered CMC armor, plunged from the front loading ramp, striking dirt with thundering mechanical crunches. Sarah and Bormus, standing guard at the entrance tunnel beneath the ruined statue, stayed gaping. Only Sarah managed to grab at her sidearm before the 4 Marines closest dropped to their plated knees, and all 8 opened fire with their gauze rifles simultaneously. C-14 fire chopped gaping chunks out of the 2 guards, dropping them in a tangled heap. Only 20 seconds had passed since Razek first saw the dropship. The unused communicator trembled in his hand. One of the Marines, his armor scarred and battered, broke ranks and stamped toward the tunnel. Shrieking, Miles came racing out of the tunnel with that dang knife of his. The Marine grabbed his wrist, crushed it, then shattered his skull with a casual backhand, scattering the idiot's brains into the dust. "Razek!" screamed Lom over the communicator. "Marines! They're killing everyone!" Not yet, thought Razek, headed for the lift and readying his gauze needler. But I'm sure we're going to give him a chance. 4 Dominion Marines advanced down the dog hallway, 2 by 2, their bulk blocking the sunlight spilling through the front gate. Chest illuminators flared, outlining the lift doors ahead in overlapping circles of light. A heavily scarred pirate lunged into the lights like an inexperienced stripper and fired a quick burst of needles. A lucky round clipped the front Marine's leg servos. He dropped to a knee, already raising his C-14, and fired back. The impaler spike stitched a diagonal line across the pirate's chest, and he fell, spilling apart. The rest of the pirates came then, whether through the loss of nerve that so many fatally mistake for courage, or through sheer hopelessness. A Marine in the rear hurled a single grenade through the heroic last charge of the pirates into the doors of the lift beyond. Flames and jagged fragments of steel scythed back along the hallway. The pirates didn't disintegrate. Not exactly. Dripping with blood and terrible things, Sergeant Baton raised his helmet's pitted visor. "Private Barry," he said politely, flicking pieces of pirate from his suit's mechanical hands. "That was a very brave and unique tactic you just used." "Thanks, Sarge." "Certainly. Because most Marines would call using shredder grenades in close quarters goram stupid." Sergeant Baton reached out the slow malice and snatched the C-14 from Pirate Barry's hands. "You don't get this back until you can fire it like a big boy, Private." "But no offense, Sarge," said Private Kel Dawes, still kneeling from the lucky shot at his leg. "But Barry has the self-preservation of a moth in a campfire factory, and those grenades are just beautiful when they go off. It ain't his fault." "I'm glad you think so, because you've just volunteered to help him scrub the people off this hallway." "Aw, Sarge." The 4th Marine raised a mechanical hand. Something dripped. Private Caston Gage raised his visor just in time before he lunged against the wall and threw up. Barry raised a hand. "Do I have to clean that up too, Sarge?" "Attention, all squad members," Kel said with mock gravity into his helmet communicator. "Priority transmission. Private Gage has expelled creep, and may be infested." Sergeant Baton sighed and rolled his eyes at the merciless heavens. "Recruits." Once the grounds were cleared, the Marines ditched their armor and began the long process of readying the upper levels of the academy for habitation. 10 hours passed. The entrance corridor was cleaned to the sergeant's somewhat unfair standards. The long mess hall on the 2nd floor received some further attention, and Caston still hadn't lived his moment of weakness down. "It ate a hole in the neosteel," Kel swore. "It was disgusting. I had to cover my eyes with a pancreas." "Because you're an expert on anatomy. Because you're an expert on anatomy, hayseed," and said Private Volin Wolf from the kitchen. He was the only one anybody trusted the cook. "I had to cover my eyes with what was probably a pancreas," Kel said, showing Valine his favorite finger. The Marine recruits, lovingly nicknamed Meatbag Squadron by Sergeant Brayton, had been sent down to the deserted planet to garrison within the abandoned academy and spend a few weeks playing war games in the abandoned skyscrapers and broken storefronts. Brayton had been delighted to find an actual opportunity for the war. Marines were green recruits, but the suits were heavily armored, equipped with the heads-up displays that handled targeting and threat detection, and did most of the aiming. The pirates had never had a chance. We are Goram warrior kings, declared pirate Hannah Saul, slapping the side of the door as she came in. Whoop. Here's the wrong voice. Queen, in your case, Barry said cheerfully. He was the youngest of them all, and a former xenobiology major, of all things. He'd entered the corps to pay for the rest of his schooling. Thank you, Hannah said, lighting a foul cigar. I forgot until you reminded me. No smoking in the dang mess hall! Balin roared from behind the steaming pot. Hold on, Kel said, as Hannah stalked back the way she came, and insolently held her cigar out the doorway while staring wide-eyed at Balin. I'm worried we're wandering from the topic at hand. Fingers around the barrel of a Bosun FN-92 sniper rifle. Caston glared up at Kel. Kick the heck out of those pirates, Kel said innocently, then mouthed. What? At Caston. Suits did most of the work, Private Dax Demon said, ducking under Hannah's cigar. The pirates' inept tinkering and Barry's grenade had ravaged 2 of the 3 lifts. Dax had spent the last 6 hours restarting the generators and repairing the electrical systems, and trying to unlock the Academy's tangled security network. These suits are junk, Balin said. The 5-4 armored infantry model my family modified is... Well, hang on, Kel said. Your family is the Wolf in Wolf Industries? Did you know that, Hannah? Oh yeah, Hannah said. I think I remember hearing it from the other 500 times he brought it up. Ha ha, said Balin, but he was smiling. I've never heard this, Caston said, relieved that the currents of mockery had parted around him. Probably because you were so busy throwing up, Kel said. Balin so admires Mengsk, Hannah began. Emperor Mengsk, Dax corrected from the corner. His Grace, His Lordship, the Eternal Emperor Mengsk the First, Hannah said, genuflecting, that he's decided to likewise abandon his wealth and join the common men and women, Barry said helpfully. Thank you, Barry, Annie said. I forgot again. Common men and women, all right, and make a name for himself on the field of battle. Next, if he's done his homework, he'll sacrifice an entire planet so he can rise to... Hi, Sarge! Don't stop talking treason for my account, Private Saul, Sergeant Peyton said as he entered the circle of light from the shadows in the long depths of the nest hall. Even out of his suit, he was a big man, with a scar splitting the stubble over his scalp. Just making a joke, Sarge, Kel said, the smile wiped off of his face. Don't you think you've defended enough people today? Peyton said, raising an eyebrow. And heck, do I care? She's a lifter, same as me. Lifer. That earns her some grumbling privileges, so long as she exercises some dang restraint about where she uses them. He held her eyes for a long, grim moment. She nodded. Peyton sniffed the air. Smells right glorious in here. You're an angel of mercy, Private Wolf. Where are our medic and Private Drumar? A horrified expression crossed his face. Not together, I hope. No, Caston said. I saw Private Drummer heading up to the observation deck. I think Corporal Son is in her room. I don't like her, said Dax, and the Marines turned in surprised unison. Dax rarely voiced opinions. He'd been resocked for some unspecified crime after his conscription, and it was generally accepted that there wasn't much Dax left in there. She talks to us like we're already dead. If I were her, I wouldn't like you either, Peyton said, recovering first. Flying recruits around, being awoken up every time one of you delicate lilies bangs an elbow. Private Gage, go check on our wayward Marine. No skipping meals in this outfit. Reflecting that speaking to Peyton about anything was a good way to get volunteered, Caston went, shouldering his FN-92 along the way. Caston closed his eyes as the lift rose, putting one hand against the humming wall. He'd smiled at all the right times, reacted in all the right ways. None of them had seen. Screaming in the soundproof box, he punched the wall over and over and over, willing the weakness to leave with each shuddering strike. Caston exited the lift, carefully composed and smiling faintly. He needn't have bothered. Private Mark Drummer was staring out the nearest window into the dark of the ruined cityscape, where broken skyscrapers rose like tombstones in the faint moonlight. Mark, Sarge says you gotta come down for dinner. I'm not hungry, Mark said. Yeah, well, he says that doesn't matter, Caston said heartily. You know how he is. I don't like it, Mark said quickly. He's alright, Caston said, puzzled. No, Mark said, turning to face him. I mean today, the killing. I thought I was ready, but I shot that woman. I saw her fall in pieces. A cold well opened in Caston's chest. His hands trembled. He needed to say something, to disarm this conversation before it went somewhere dangerous. She was scum, he said. Crap. What? Mark said, wrinkling his brow. She would have killed you. She tried to kill you, man, Caston said, trying to bring it back to safety. Yeah, I know, Mark said, and Caston relaxed. But I was looking out at this city, Mark continued, and I was thinking, we spent all our time fighting rebels, pirates, Zerg, Protoss, and our worlds are ruined, and we just keep killing each other. And for what? Caston exhaled in an explosive rush. What should we do? Talk to them? They want to exterminate us, idiot. Mark blinked once. After what happened to you today, I thought you'd understand. I'm not a coward. Neither am I, Mark said, meeting Caston's anger calmly and a little sadly. I just don't want to do this anymore. Caston turned from him and went to the glassless window, balling his fist into a bloodless rock. The wind smelled of rust and decay. He breathed it in. He breathed out. Our enemies aren't reasonable, he said. Look at this place, Mark. You want to lay down your gun, but they'll kill you, armed or unarmed. They'll burn your home down to ash. They don't care if you fight or not. Caston, Mark said after a long moment's silence. Where are you from? Don't you get it? Caston said, wheeling round. It doesn't matter. Pick a planet. Our cities are being destroyed and overrun and obliterated from orbit. You don't get to stand on the Goram sidelines, Mark. If we don't fight, we're extinct. Behind Mark, something floated between the dark pillars of two skyscrapers. Two somethings. Huge, dark shapes with dangling appendages. The well of icy water spilled over, crawling up in Caston's arms and over his shoulders. He had first seen overlords in the final days of Marsara, rising over the horizon like tumors. The Zerg had been unknown then, and he'd sat on the rooftop of his parents' home, watching them come, eclipsing the daylight. He remembered only snatches of the day that followed, dark clouds of mutilisks flooding across the horizon in rippling flocks, hiding beneath the cellar door while his mother shielded it from the outside, screaming as bloody claws cut through her into the wood beneath. His father's roughed hands around his waist, shoving him into a last transport as Zerglings swarmed up around the ramp and overlords hung overhead, watching. Caston shrugged the FN-92 off his shoulder and pushed past Mark. Caston, what? Through the scope, the two overlords were perfectly visible, even though it was night. Bulbous, pulsing masses of purple-red flesh, pierced by knobs of carapace and jagged bones. Spider-like legs twitched underneath, just behind hanging, somber heads. Each one had dimly lit clusters of eyes. The bigger overlord's was purple, the others green. They had halted in the gap. They were turning towards each other. If they hadn't been monsters, Caston would have imagined that they were speaking. He centered the crosshairs on the nearest one's head. The weakness, the trembling fear that haunted him in the Academy's entrance hallway, was gone. Caston, Mark said, I've heard about this. All the Zerg have gone wild. No one's controlling them. They're harmless. Good, Caston said, and pulled the trigger. The Overlord's head jerked sideways. It sank into the side of a nearby building and tumbled gently to the ground, crumbling like a discarded sack. Purple eyes winked out, one by one. With glacial slowness, the remaining Overlord turned to face him through the crosshairs. Emerald eyes flared in the dark, meeting his, seeing him. He fired again and missed. The Overlord had vented some of the gas, keeping it afloat, and drifted to the left, behind the nearest building. I'm not going to watch this, Mark said. Caston ignored him, aiming above the skyscraper line and side to side. The lift doors pinged behind him as he waited. An hour passed, and Green Eyes hadn't reappeared. Grimacing, he slung the rifle back over his shoulder and descended. No longer one and one are we. One are we. Alone are we. The last of our kind are we. With grief and rage hurtle we from the horizon Rhine. From the embrace flee we. Into madness, into solitude. We are alone. We are the last of our kind. The we who are born now will not remember the time before the becoming. Our world will be forgotten. There must be payment for this. There must be punishment. We will punish them. We? I will punish them. And I will bring the we. Caston, Kell, and Mark advanced up a narrow street lined by towering ruins. The empty windows opened into rounded darkness, like empty eye sockets. A rifle boomed from a roof. The shot glanced down, splashing against Kell's armored leg and spraying red across the ground. Caston and Drummer hustled into cover against the rusted frame of a luxury vehicle. Again with the leg! Kell groaned, falling obediently to his paint-round, stained knee, and crawling towards the rest of his squad. Call that a kill shot, Private Barry? Growled Sergeant Peyton from across an open channel. Sorry, Sarge. Barry replied from the roof. The rifle boomed again, missing Kell by a meter and change. Caston tracked the shot and caught the muzzle of the rifle disappearing back over a roof's edge. His hug bracketed Barry's armored outline through the concrete. Tagged and locked, Caston said, grinning. Sorry, Barry. Well done, Private Gage, Sergeant Peyton said. A rifle bolt clacked. Please feel free to stand up and receive my congratulations. Holy heck, Gage, said Kell, finally reaching them. That's 14 kills today. Save some for the rest of us. Behind him, Mark turned away, his expression hidden by his faceplate. 2 days had passed since they'd arrived. Caston had waited for Mark to report him as dangerous and unbalanced. The moment never came, and Caston had recovered from his initial embarrassment. They'd run a dozen war games since yesterday, and he'd topped the charts nearly every time. Killing the Overlord had saved him. He finally met the enemy face to face and taken his shot. The hallway had been a fluke. He'd never hesitate again, never be weak again. The universe swarmed with the enemies and traitors of humanity, and he was a Marine, paid to kill them. Life was good. Sarge, I don't get it, Kell said. Why do they have to pretend we're hunting down fake rebels when there's real Zerg all over the planet? Because they're feral, Private, said Temporary Commander Peyton. They're dangerous, but disorganized. No real challenge. And this is? Kell said, glancing around the edge of the corner. Sergeant's shot splattered against his faceplate, and Kell went down. The sergeant had the sun behind him, and Caston couldn't see a thing. Ow, groaned Kell from the ground. Killed by amateur rebels. My shame is endless. Amateur, Valen said over the channel, from his hidden sniper's nest. How dare you? Right, said Hannah. We're hardened rebel elites. Thanks. Exactly, Valen continued. We don't shave or bathe. We liberate civilian settlements by setting them on fire. According to propaganda, that's what we do, Hannah growled. But actually, we're displaced settlers with legitimate patriotic concerns. Just finish a scan, Dax interrupted. He'd stayed behind to get the base systems up and running, and the radio static flattened his dull monotone still further. All clear. Don't sound so disappointed, Private, Sergeant Peyton said. That's just how he talks since the recruits panned his brain flat, Sarge, Anna said. We're lucky he has a soon-to-be court-martialed for smart buttery private to speak up for him then. Just trying to sound like a rebel, Hannah said cheerfully. You're not cursing enough, Valen said. Hold on, Kell said. If I'm a rebel, I get to curse, set things on fire, and stop bathing. I'm on the wrong team. They don't allow you to marry your sister, Valen said. Rebel scum. Private Saul and Wolf, Peyton said, would you kindly stop horsing around and fall back south towards me? Caston narrowed his eyes. peering through the burnt and rusted metal. Sergeant was a canny son of a gun. Any tip about where he was had to be a trap. He groaned. You've moved behind us, haven't you? Damnation, said Sergeant Peyton, rising above the edge of the roof with his rifle aimed. This private has seen through my clever ruse. I shall retire in disgrace. Where would you like your kill shots? Incoming Zerg, said Zax from the base, as if commenting from the weather. Static hissed in the squad channel's silence. Is this part of the exercise, Sarge? Barry said. Nope, said Sergeant Peyton said calmly. Fall back to the academy on the Double Marines. Where, Private Diamond? The sensors report a big Zerg to the south. I'm trying to... The Marines helped each other up and hustled. Dax exhaled directly into his helmet mic, and the Marines winced in unison. Found it. Sorry, Sarge. No threat. It's just an Overlord. I found a worker and called to it. It did not listen. Madness infects the we. Madness infects me. With individuality comes insanity. I gathered my will. It struggled. It obeyed. It became a nest for the we. My we. I am not the Overmind. I am not the Kerrigan. I am not a gathered mind. My will is limited. To hold one is pain. To hold more is agony. To hold many is impossible. To punish the not we, I must be careful. From the larvae, I called volatile ones. I told them to sleep, and they slept. I gathered their bodies into myself. From the larvae, I called the winged ones. I hold them with my will. Agony. They will wait. They must wait. I will gather the attention of the not we. I will not listen to the madness, to the you are alone, you're weak, your world is dead, you are dead, all is dead. I will not listen to the madness. The winged ones will wait. They must wait. Dangdest thing, Sergeant Peyton said, resting his armor's gauntlets on the railing with a faint click. Try again. Casson did. Aiming the rifle was harder with everyone watching, but the Overlord was big enough to eclipse the skyscrapers behind it. He'd once shot off a decapede off the fence during a sandstorm. He fired at the Overlord. And missed. Leaping heck, said Cal. I saw it that time. It dodged the dang bullet. How did it do that? It must have known we're about to fire and that it... Bull crap, said Hannah. Overlords aren't that smart. The spacious observation deck was getting crowded, especially since all the Marines were still in their suits. Corporal Son, their medic and pilot, had come up as well. Almost painfully thin, she stood in a distant corner, watching the Overlord with grim gray eyes. Are they always that big, Sarge? Said Kel. Almost. This one's seen a few fights, too. Look at that scarring. Everyone leaned forward. Night was falling over Tarsonis. Jagged fingers of light slipped out of the city square, filling the observation deck with long shadows. None of the studies I've ever read about talked about them dodging bullets, Barry said, and the usual cheer was gone from his voice. Caston was the only one who noticed. Barry sounding worried like Dax, sounding anything. It was unnatural. This, said Hannah, lighting up another one of Valen's favorite cigars, is some top-secret bullcrap. I guarantee it. Some escapee from a Confederate holding cell. Yes, Valen said, casually reaching over, pinching the cigar out of her mouth with mechanical fingers and flicked it out the window. An ingenious war machine. It approaches the enemy and floats around them. Yeah, that is weird, Kel said. Of all the interesting things to circle on this rock, why us? Caston involuntarily glanced at Mark. The Marine was already looking at him, asking a silent question. Gaston turned away, his jaw aching from the pressure of his gritted teeth. No, he wasn't going to tell the squad. There was nothing to tell. To say that the green-eyed Overlord had come here because he had killed the purple-eyed one was to admit the Overlord remembered him, that the mindless beast had a mind. The Overlord descended into the relative safety behind the wall of burnt-out hulks. Caston laid the FN-92 against a wall and drew his C-14. Corporal San seemed to reach a decision and strode up to Baton's side, speaking in whispered bursts that Caston could only barely hear. Get out! Be more! Right now! Baton looked down, thinking, then responded, nearly as quietly. Either the thing isn't a threat, or it's too late to run. We're safer here. San didn't argue. She shrugged and returned to her corner. Gripping the C-14 so hard that his fingers ached inside the suit's gauntlets, Caston came to a decision. We should go out there, hunt it down and kill it. Everyone looked at him like he suggested they go outside naked. It's dark out there? Kel said, as if he couldn't see. Doesn't matter. Overlords can carry drones. Drones can start hives. We need to kill it before it attacks. The tension stretched across the wide room like a web, tight and quivering. You're right, Kel said gravely. Let's do a practice run. He hunched over, dangling his suited arms beneath his body, and made weak pinching motions. Step by lumbering step, he approached Caston. Ooh, float, float. Shoot me before I land on you. Pinch, pinch. Hannah's snicker was louder in Caston's ears than it actually was. He shoved Kel to the floor with a rattling crash and pointed out the window. Idiot! Do you see it? That's not a joke. That's the Zerg out there. I really can't see anything from the ground. The rest of the Marines laughed, except for Baton, whose face resembled a thundercloud above a dark mountain, and Corporal San, who didn't appear to have smiled in her entire life. The Zerg aren't individuals, Caston, Barry said, smiling. Overlords relay orders. They don't give them. Without a leaguer, they go crazy. They probably want from one of the lesser hides at Ewan Park. That's not madness, Caston insisted. That thing is stalking us. Smiles faltered around the room as they realized Caston might not be joking. Sergeant Baton dropped his hand on Caston's shoulder. Calm down, Private, he muttered. You're making a dang scene. Barry didn't notice. He probably thought he was helping. Overlords don't hunt, actually. Not even their predecessors did. The Gargantus Proximae were semi-intelligent herbivores before the race was infested by the Zerg, communal with a language based on psionics, tentacle manipulation, and color. Oh, and a little-known fact, Barry beamed. They mourned. Mourned, Caston said dully, glancing between the Zerg threat and the clearly insane Private. Oh yes, Barry said happily. They reportedly could live for centuries, but when one of them died, they all turned to sky blue color, given a sky with the right amount of oxygen and nitrogen, of course. Anyway, now this one's free of the swarm. It's feral, but harmless. Caston glanced to the sergeant. There's an order implicit in Baton's face, and it was, Shut up, Private Gage. He turned to watch the Overlord continue its circuit of the outer academy grounds, and blinked. He was coming towards them, rising over the shards of the hotel tower like a purple moon. The Marines chuckled, and a few raised their C-14s for some target practice. The mood gratefully returned to the cycle of gentle mockery that was the status quo within the meatbag squadron. Something flashed through the room, something invisible, intangible, and focused. Caston staggered. So did Barry and Valen, though they recovered separately, shaking their heads. No one else had noticed a thing. It hadn't been the word now. It had been the essence of now, hurled with all the strength of an order, and had come from the direction of the Overlord. It raised its head, fixing him with those lambent green eyes. It knew him. Caston hissed through his teeth, imagined that he was right, that Green Eyes had dropped a drone somewhere, and that drone had created a hive, and what if the Overlord knew that everyone would come up and watch him? It. Circle around the academy. And why would it approach now unless it was trying to draw attention to itself? Caston spun around just before a screeching cluster of mutalisks swooped down, their insectile bodies bobbing eagerly between Beneath their leathery wings, whipping their tails forward, they disgorged a wave of ravenous parasites at precisely the same time. Shards of neosteel and bundles of glaive worms ricocheted across the observation deck. Caston screamed. Razor-sharp fragments of metal sparked off his breastplate, and a chunk of the armor on his shoulder was simply gone. Gasping for air, he staggered back, taking in the carnage around him. Mark had fallen to his knees, clawing at the helmet. With metal fingers, his red steam poured out from the place his face had been. Barry didn't even have a head anymore. None of them had even put down your Goram faceplate and shoot, Private! Sergeant Baton roared, shaking him by the suit's collar. Casson seized hold of the orders gratefully. He shut his faceplate and glanced over his shoulder for the Overlord. It was gone. I no longer hold the winged ones with my will. I rise into the clouds. I am heavy with the weight of the dead volatile ones. The curve of the word is below. The cold place is above. I want to float up. I do not want to do this. I want to do this. I am only one, and not me, not we, must know fear, must know madness. He must know fear and madness. There must be punishment. The deafening clatter of the C-14 shook the floor of the observation deck and bounced off the surrounding skyscrapers. A gaping wound exploded in the mutalisk's chest, and it dropped from sight. Another dipped into Caston's stream of fire and pinwheeled away towards the distant ground. The remaining two shuddered suddenly and turned their acidic projectiles on each other, hissing and screaming. The remainder of Meekbad's squad focused their fire on the feral mutalisks. The creatures fell apart in a shower of wet flesh. Caston's rifle clicked empty. The zero on his HUD flashed at him for several seconds before he realized what it meant and reloaded. The neosteel floor was a melted ruin of acid scars and dying worms. Mark had fallen forward and lay with his head twisted to the side. Nothing was left inside except for the red and bone, but in his mind, Caston still felt the weight of that calm, sad gaze. He holstered his C-14 and went for Kell, fist cocking back. Without breaking stride, Sergeant Baton slammed into him, pushing him against the wall. This is not happening, Private. I tried to warn him, and he made jokes, and they're Goram dead. Yeah, they are, Baton said, his visor flicking open. Muscles leapt in his neck and jaw. So look at him. How do you think he feels about that now? Caston looked at Kell, standing silently over the bodies of Mark and Barry. He looked away. Right, Marines, this is what's going to happen. We are going to make our way to Corporal San's dropship, and we are going to leave, and we are going to do both with all speed. Screw that, Sarge, Hannah said, raising her visor and spitting. We're going to hunt down that Overlord. Absolutely, Valen said. Oh, I'm sorry, said Sergeant Baton. You must be new. The last thing I said was we refer to in the Marine Corps as a Goram order. Now, 100 feet west of the Academy, a green blur streaks through the hollow interior of a skeletal skyscraper and exploded. Its foundation obliterated, the skyscraper struck the concrete with a hollow, teeth-rattling boom and fell over, turning a quarter-mile of abandoned buildings into a churning furrow of gray smoke, jagged debris. With dry mouths, the Marines turned away from the devastation and looked up at the hidden sky. The second Baneling, the Overlord hit the landing pad. The dropship and the unfortunate pirate's cruiser erupted in a tower of green-tinged fire. Pile into the lift right now, Baton shouted, slamming a fist down against the paddle. With a gentle ping, the doors of the Academy's only working lift opened. San went first, almost instinctually. Casson followed, beginning to understand how this unarmored medic had lived long enough to get that 1,000-yard stare. Valen, Hannah, and Dex followed. Kell still hadn't moved. With a growl, Baton grabbed hold of the stunned Marine and shoved him into the too-crowded lift and pressed a button on the inside. Dex? Sarge? I need you to cut the crap and get everyone down to the lowest level. You copy? Yes, Sarge. How did you know? Please, I've seen 1,000 Daxes. I'm a sergeant, Private. Are you getting in the lift, Sarge? Anna said. Baton smiled. Use your eyes, Private Saul. Space. The door slid shut, and they descended. By the shuttering of the lift, next baneling corpse struck the observation deck, dead center. I descend. Fire and smoke rise to meet me. I hear the silence of the dead. I hear the thoughts of the living. His punishment is not finished yet. From the larvae, I call a digger and a spine bearer. From the larvae, I call the many ones. I hold them with my will, and I send them. Agony. The lift doors opened on the barracks hallway, a level which was underground, but not far enough for any of their liking. Everyone out, Dax said. I need space to work. What was Sergeant Baton talking about? Valen said as they pulled out. Kel moved farther along the wall and hunkered against the wall. Well, that resocialization I went through? Yes. Didn't actually happen. I got caught hacking into the Ministry of Finance's records. Was trying to fix something for a friend, he said, tearing a panel off the wall. From the recesses of the suit, he pulled a handheld device that didn't look like a standard Marine issue hardware and hooked it up to the wiring within. They're going to restock me and enlist me as punishment. They told me that and left me alone in a room with a restock console for 10 minutes. You mean you hacked the console? Thrashed around a lot in the tank to make it look good. Let me get this straight, Hannah said. Spent all this time feeling sorry for you, and you weren't brain panned? How the heck do you expect us to ever trust you again? Whatever, Dax said. Mind if I save your butts anyway? Please do. Women everywhere will thank you, Valen said, turning to the medic. You're not going to say anything, are you? If he can get us to safety, I'll nominate him for Emperor, San said dryly. Casson walked over to Kel. He'd been ready to hit that man for something that wasn't his fault, and he needed it. I know, Kel said, raising his head. His eyes were red-rimmed. I was always joking around when we trained. Joking when you're trying to warn us. They're dead because of me. I know. That's not what I wanted to say. Look, the Overlord came because I... Would you two girls shut up for a second? Anna said, striding past them down the dim hallway. Lights flickered. Their groups had stayed in the rooms nearest the lift, but the barracks had been built to house hundreds of ghosts and ghost recruits. The halls were long and dark and full of echoes, and now something was scratching. I hear it too, Kel said, pushing off his feet. What do you think it is? I hope rats, Anna said. Around the nearest bend, something screamed. But probably not, Anna said, limbering her rifle. Dax, hurry up. Feel free to jump in any time you figure out how to disarm in a mega-class facility lockdown. Two Zerglings scrambled around the far corner, nipping and clawing at each other. Seeing the Marines, they screamed again and charged. Valen, Cass, and Kel and Hannah opened fire. Gauze rounds tore blood from their backs, rippling at their wings. Still they came, oblivious to the pain. A lucky shot smashed the skull of the nearest, and it skidded to a boneless stop. Caston's rifle clicked dry, and this time he didn't have any more magazines. The remaining Zergling repped between the Marines, heading for Dax and the unarmored San. Leaned Dax's rifle against the elevator wall, braced her legs against the recoil, and fired a single shot. The Zergling burst apart. The Marines stared. Kel laughed first, and Cass and Hannah joined them when Valen flinched at the unexpected sound and dropped his rifle. Valen snickered as he awkwardly bent to retrieve it. Even San snorted her amusement while massaging her aching shoulder. Glancing over his shoulder in annoyance at the interruption, only Dax saw the other 6 Zerglings around the corner. Insectoid wings fluttering, they struck Valen altogether, squealing and slashing. Wide ribbons of blood arced up the walls and over the ceiling. Valen went down without another sound. With a running start, Kel kicked 3 of the Zerglings off Valen and fired, screaming wordlessly. They evaporated in clouds of blood and claw beneath the barrage. Hannah tried to pull Varen clear, recoiling when a Zergling shrieked and took her suit's mechanical hand off of the wrist. She cursed, stomped it flat against the steel beside the spreading pool of Valen's blood, and fired a bullet burst one-handed into its skull. Her rifle went dry just as the Zergling stopped moving. Casson stood motionless. He was falling again. One by one. He was failing. Then he grabbed the nearest Zergling by the tail and swung it against the wall again and again, until nothing was left but featureless flesh. Distantly, Kel's rifle fired an extended burst and clicked dry. Caston turned to see Kill kick the last zergling off Valen's chest. Claw marks marred Valen's armor in the dozens. The neosteel floor was visible through his body. Son hissed and shook her head. Dax, Hannah croaked, staggering towards the lift. I know, Dax said. Almost done. We're not, Kel said, staring back up the hallway. The hydralisk's crested head nearly reached the ceiling. With a metallic slithering sound, it surged forward, twisting and shuddering as if stung by millions of invisible insects. Corporal, Hannah said, storming back towards the lift. The rifle! Save the ammo, Kel said, and charged. Caston should have yelled, should have told him he didn't need to redeem himself. It wasn't his fault. The words froze in his throat. He couldn't move. Caston, get the heck out of the way! Hannah roared from behind him, but Kel had already leapt in, grabbing hold of the creature's crest and hauling its head down as the insane hydralisk raked long gashes on his back plate. The hydralisk focused on Caston, tusked jaws slavering with the hunger and recognition. It hunched over, exposing the glittering darkness between flesh and carapace, and the armor-piercing spines flew at him. He couldn't miss at this range if it was aiming for him. It wasn't aiming for him. The spines hissed past, nicking his armor, and Corporate saw and screamed behind him. Meat slithered onto the floor. The hydralisk leaned backwards, thrashing its serpentine tail, and rammed its claws into Kel's gut clear through his armor, over and over. Reaching up with trembling hands, Kel seized the bottom and top jaws of the hydralisk and wrenched them apart with a wet crack. They fell together. Kel's faceplate irised open. His mouth worked, but only blood came out. He smiled. It wasn't your fault, Caston said, dropping behind him. It was mine. Do you hear me? It was mine. Kel's smile was fixed, and his eyes were empty. Staggering back to his feet, Casson turned, dreading everything that was waiting there for him. San must have seen the spines coming, and turned instinctively. The spine had struck her from the side, nearly bisecting her. The others had pinned Dax against the lift wall. He lay in a field of red. Lift's ready to go, he said, and exhaled once. He didn't inhale. Why didn't you move, Caston? Hannah said, shoving him. Why didn't you move? It's my fault, Caston said dully. Hannah stood still, then opened her faceplate. Even with exhaustion and grief warring across her face, her glare was magnificent. We're the only two left, and you're not going catatonic on me, Gage, she said, so listen. You didn't make the Zerg the hungry sons they are. You didn't even start the war. They did. You have nothing to apologize for. But he did. She was only partly right. He hadn't fired the first shot. He just fired the next one. Hannah dragged him back towards the lift, with their suits remaining in hand, cursing at him and the world in general. She was saying something about lying low, then hunting the Overlord down when the reinforcements came. He was pretty sure he responded. The doors closed. Caston looked at his feet. Blood rippled around them. The lift descended haphazardly into the depths of the academy, coming to a sudden, shuddering halt every few floors. While Hannah grimly outlined their revenge, Caston watched the floors flicker past like images on a projector, flinching each time the doors hissed open and slammed shut. Crumpled skeletons in tattered Confederate uniforms, trapped in Tarsonas, fell. Chunk! At the end of a short corridor, a glass wall covered in red-veined flesh. Chunk! A long hallway strung with hot, pale lights. The farthest one failed, then the next, and the darkness rushed towards them like a landslide. Chunk! The lift free fell for several seconds before shuddering to a stop with stench of burning plastic and metal. The open doors were only halfway up their waists. The flickering display read, Z. With a flamethrower and step on them. You hear me, Caston? I hear you, Caston said, reaching down to open the doors on Z level. Together, he and Hannah pulled the elevator down to the last level, lowered their visors, and stepped through. Silence ruled down here. Intermittent grime-stained lights gave the neosteel a yellow tint. A sign reading security control pointed down the branching hallway. There's gotta be a working console in there, Hannah said. We'll call for help, then look around for emergency stairs. Caston let her take the lead, since she had the only rifle with ammo left. He turned a corner. He had a feeling that their search for stairs wasn't going to go well. Those Confederate soldiers would have starved to death if there had been any... Wait. There were no stairs. How had the Zerglings and Hydralisk attacked them? A sly scratching in the wall behind them was their only warning. A Zerg roach sprang onto the Neil skill and skidded, spraying sparks as its 6 talons fought for purchase. It hissed triumphantly from within the spiked safety of its thick carapace. Hannah wheeled about, leveling the C-14 awkwardly over her suit's handless forearm. Down, Caston! Caston had no intention of letting her face it alone. He had no intention of surviving this planet, come to that. He lunged towards the towering roach, reached out with both hands to hold it still so Hannah could take her shot. With a contemptuous swipe of its bulky body, the roach knocked him against the wall with a bang of steel on steel. Hannah fired, and the Gauss round skipped and sparked off the roach's armor. It reeled back, maws gaping. Time slowed. Hannah threw the rifle to Caston. The roach unleashed a flood of acid. Hannah stumbled backwards, choking, her entire front half covered in the bubbling green fluid. She sat down heavily on the floor, legs splayed, fell backward. Talons dancing, the roach turned to Caston. It opened its mouth again, and the bile surged at the back of its throat. A missile of pure thought plunged from the sky in the dark hallway beneath the ground. The roach shuddered and stared at him, slavering. Then it bashed its head against the neurosteel into a raw and mangled pulp. Unspeakably weary, Caston inched his back up the wall behind him. He stumbled past the roach's corpse to Hannah. The acid had eaten through her armor into the ground below. Nothing recognizably human remained. With Hannah's rifle dangling from his hand, Caston eased his way along the wall to the hole the roach had ambushed them from. It was more than wide enough for him. His chest illuminators carved through the narrow darkness. The shaft led an angled away from the academy until the annealed steel became soil, hardened to a resilient crush by the roach's secretions. The tunnel began spiraling upward, and Caston followed it for half an hour. At some point, the spiral branched horizontally back to the academy, and Caston knew that if he followed it, he'd find Kel and Valen's bodies lying where they fell. He kept climbing until he was back on the surface, outside the academy. The Overlord was waiting for him. Unblinking, red-rimmed green eyes held him and judged him. Wild hatred billowed from its scarred bulk like meat from a furnace. Behind it, the melted ruins of the academy raked at the sky. With painstaking effort, and without breaking eye contact, the Overlord unfurled an undercraw and scratched a long, wavering line in the soil at Caston's feet. He stared down at it. Understanding came. 1. The Overlord had left him alive on purpose. They were both alone now. The Overlord held his gaze a moment longer. Then its side expanded, and it rose, turning away. Caston raised his rifle and faltered. It had left him alive on purpose. It wanted him to kill it. He had killed the other Overlord, and Green Eyes wanted to die because of it. Why would a Zerg care? He remembered them huddled together, as if talking. Against his will, he thought of the unusual intelligence of the creature, and how Barry had said that the Overlord's original species were capable of living for hundreds of years. He wondered if it was possible that an infested creature could regain its memories, its sentience, if separated from the swarm. How wonderful it might be to find someone you remembered at the other end of centuries full of horrors. With a disgusted cry, he flung the rifle away. I rise back towards the divided horizon. My death does not come. I wish it did. I do not want to remember. I do not want to be the one anymore. I do not want to be I anymore. I do not want to mourn. I cross the horizon line. I return to the embrace. Pain. We In the calm embrace of the we, hang we. Return, Willa Kerrigan. This know we. Nothing else is there. We do not want to remember. Overlords are we. Casson had dug and filled the 8 graves by the time the sun rose. He felt his empty armor beside them and walked off into the ghost of the Confederate capital. A rescue team would come eventually. He didn't want to be rescued. Rescue meant resocialization. Resocialization meant forgetting. He didn't want to forget. Movement caught his eye, and he looked up. Far above the ruined world, the Overlord rose into the dawn, glowing a rich sky blue. That was Just an Overlord by Gavin Jurgens-Fiery. I'm still not sure I pronounced that correctly. Thank you so much for listening to the story, for stopping by. And if nobody comes for me, and maybe if there's an interest for this, I'll read the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Maybe I'll go back to the Wings of Liberty ones and start with those instead of Heart of the Swarm. But this one was always interesting to me. I always liked the Overlord, and the idea of gets look into its mind. We know that it isn't just a mindless aberration controlled by the hive mind of the swarm, but it is its own creature. And it's kind of a beautiful thought. It's the only time we really get to see is Zerg's thoughts, because all the rest of the stories, it's just other people's perspective of the Zerg that the story is about. The scientists, the soldiers who have to fight them, those who are torn apart, or just barely survive. Anyway, that brings our little story to a close. I'll be logging off for the evening. Thank you for joining me. I do hope that you had fun. This is Vox Calidus, signing out. Farewell.